Everyone, welcome back to our tasting series. This is part 3. Today we're going to talk about Chardonnay. Prince Edward County is known for Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, great cool climate varietals. So we're going to taste through some of our Chardonnays that we've got in our lineup, and then we're going to do a quick barrel tasting. So I'll let Glenn take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another gorgeous day in paradise. As Chris said, we're doing Chardonnays today. Chardonnay is really uniquely suited to this climate. Aside from the fact that we have to bury them for the winter, which is absolutely ridiculous, but without, we don't get any fruit. So essentially we have some great warm days, fantastic cool nights. We have some good phenolic ripeness on our Chardonnay typically, while maintaining a good amount of acidity, which is really what makes us a cool growing region here, absolutely. It's all about purity of fruit and vibrant acidity to balance things out from this region. So today we've got 2 Chardonnays we're going to be tasting. We've got our 2017 estate grown Chard, and we've got a 2017 from a nearby vineyard just out of Hillier. It's called the Ramirez family vineyard. 2 different styles of Chardonnay altogether. I will also make a lovely mention of our culmination, 2016 vintage, so it is a little off vintage compared to the other 2, but just to make the point, basically when we harvest our Chardonnay for the culmination, so this is our traditional method, you may remember from our first series, we pick the Chardonnay for the culmination 2 to 3 weeks at least before we pick for these. The premise here is that we keep more acidity in the culmination. We always want a little more acidity in our sparklings. Essentially, we want less acidity in our table wines. Giving it 2 to 3 weeks allows us to drop some acid, but also, I know what that sounded like, also allows us to get more sugar produced into the grape and a little more intensity of flavor. Interestingly, this typically is a little more on the citrus-driven notes. When it's a young wine, of course, after a couple of years on the yeast and everything else, all the tertiary aromas come around. Whereas here, we're getting towards more tree fruit, so more pear, Asian pear, apple kind of stuff.
Sorry, we had a brief interruption. The delivery man showed up. Back where were we?
Troubles in this end of the county. Anyway, where were we? Dropping acid, something or other. So we have a higher pH on these wines as compared to this one. The idea is to make these a little rounder, a little richer in terms of fruit flavor. There's another side of things here that's really important, obviously, is the fermentation style, whether it's fermented in steel or oak. Obviously, when we talk about Chardonnay, a lot of people associate that with California, butter, oak, wood, picnic table, 2x4, you know, that sort of thing. We don't like that style. I don't like that style. I have a heavy preference for Macon style, so kind of a Chablis-esque, very much steel, very much minerally, and a little bit of oak to add some depth and complexity to it. When we ferment in steel, we maintain the precursors of flavor compounds that lead to a mineral flavor. Of course, when we talk about minerality, which is one of the things that everyone talks about with regards to Prince Edward County, it's a cooler growing region, as I mentioned before. The premise is that think of a gravel driveway after a rain. That smell, that feel, that's what we get out of our Chardonnays here when they're done in steel. It's not because of the limestone in the ground. Ultimately, by definition, we cannot taste mineral. We can only taste organic molecules, and mineral is non-organic. What we're tasting and smelling, what you're smelling off a gravel driveway after a rain is what we call the petrichor. It's the stuff that's on the stone that we associate with a mineral flavor. But minerals do not taste anything. So we can't taste that. So it's not really related to the stone. It's really the grape itself that has these precursors to these flavor compounds that taste like the smell off of a wet gravel driveway. When we ferment in steel, we promote the production of those precursors during ferment. When we ferment in oak, it kind of blocks most of that. Not all of it, but it reduces the mineral component a lot. We need to have an anaerobic fermentation style to promote that minerality. So when we come down to these 2 Chardonnays, both the same vintage, 2017, from our place we did 2/3 in steel, 1/3 in oak. From Ramirez we did all in oak. Here on ours we use more new oak for the oak portion, and on the Ramirez we used very old oak, 3 and 4 year old barrels basically. The premise here for this one was to add a little more complexity. This vineyard is a little easier to grow in than ours is. Ours, in some spots, we have 2 or 3 inches of sandy clay over solid bedrock, and so it's quite difficult, quite stressful on the vine. So we get basically more stress on the vine, less fruit production, more intensity of flavors. So we always want to maintain the steel component of this blend, whereas here we felt that it could use a little bit more depth to it, and so we put it all in oak. Tasting the two, we'll see a big difference between the mineral component, but also we'll see a big difference in the mouthfeel. So the steel, again, with the mineral component, but also we don't extract a lot. There's obviously no oak to that component, so we're not extracting these rich, almost sweet flavors out of the oak. We do want a little bit of that from the oak component. So the 1/3 covers that, but it still maintains all the freshness and the fruit flavors. So we'll start with the 17. From here, again, 2/3, 1/3. Definitely oak on the nose. With the newer barrels, it's a lot more aromatic from the oak perspective up front, but there's definitely a good amount of treatment. I like this one. This particular vintage really came across to me as Asian pear. Both of these wines have gone through malolactic fermentation, which takes one of the harsher acids, the malic acid, which is the acid associated with apples, and converts it to lactic acid, the acid associated with butter. Butter acids are a lot richer and creamier and less perceived acidity. So again, a cool climate, we always have good acidity to our wines, and for a rounder chard, we always make sure to put it through malolactic fermentation. So on the nose, definitely some newer oak on the nose, but the fruit is still very much present on the nose. And on the mouth, you should have a richness as well as a freshness, so it's kind of a balance between the two components. One of my favorite vintages, I have to say. I did come here for Pinot Noir in the first place, but really it's the Chardonnays that are really keeping me here. I think I've said that in relation to the culmination. I'm going to say it again in relation to the Chardonnay here. So cheers, enjoy. And in comparison to the Ramirez Chard, here again we have a similar acidity, but the perception of acidity, because of all the oak we used on the Ramirez, is going to be a lot less intense. It's going to be a richer and creamier in the mouth. The fruit flavors should be very similar. Indeed, we have the old oak. I'm not smelling as much oak on this as I did in this because the impact on the aromatics is not as intense. However, in the mouth, what we're going to get is a much heavier, richer, rounder version of the same, if you will. Cheers. A little rounder, a little richer. Still a nice, fresh acidity to it. Again, we're still in a cool growing region. This is not your California chard, but comparing them side by side, you do see a huge difference in terms of mouthfeel and in terms of texture. The flavor, very much along the same lines, Asian pear, tree fruit, that kind of thing, which is quite nice. So let's move on to the barrels. We'll try out some tank sample that has not been in oak at all, and we'll add some oak sample from the barrel. So here we are now in our barrel cellar, also known as our old retail space. We are going to look at the barrels and the differences in the barrels and that sort of thing, and compare with the steel component of our 2019 Chardonnay. So this is chard that we harvested last fall, that we fermented over the winter, and are currently aging either in steel or in oak. So here we have basically, so this is a 228 liter barrel that we're not using for Chardonnay. This actually has a Merlot in it, comparing to a 500 liter barrel. What we've decided over the years is that the impact of oak on Chardonnay is a lot more subdued from a 500 liter barrel compared to a 228. I used to use only 228s because that's sort of a standard, and I test drove a couple of 500s one year and decided that I'm never going to go back to 228s for our Chardonnay. For our bigger reds like Merlot, and even our softer reds as Pinot Noir, always better, as far as I'm concerned, in 228s, although we are trying 500 on Pinot this year. The 228s were there was too much intensity of the oak component adding to our Chardonnay. So we're keeping 228s for some, but not for our Chard. So what we have over here is a 500 liter new barrel. This is a barrel from France. All our oak barrels are from France, absolutely. This is a cooper called Montgiard. It's a medium toast. I have tried a heavier toast on our Chard in the past, and I find that it's too intense for our Chard, and we lose all the characteristics of our Chardonnay, especially the cooler region Chardonnays. This is a soft Vosges forest barrel that I quite love. In fact, this will be our second one from that particular cooperage, and I would always replace with the same. So with the thief, we'll take a sample. So as I mentioned, the wine was made last fall, and so it's spent all winter and most of the summer so far, obviously, in the barrel. We have not taken it out. This wine has fermented in that barrel. The fermentation in barrel tends to lead to more integration of the oak flavors into the wine, and also allows us to play with the lees. So the fermentation lees that we stir up every month or two to 3 weeks early on in the fermentation process, and usually once a month thereafter, really adds a lot more weight to the wine as well, a lot more texture. And so here we see it hasn't been stirred for a little bit, it's nice and clear, and it's really intense on oak, very much wood driven here. Ooh. It's lovely, very buttered popcorn cheese. I haven't tasted this for a while. I'm quite happy to be doing this today. Very buttered popcorn, very enticing. Oh, let me give that a try. Sorry, bear with me. Oh, that's dreamy. I have to say, a lot of people who taste these wines, oh my God, how good is that? When people are tasting these out of these new barrels, it's really intense in everything. We've got some intensity of fruit, really intense wood flavors as well, and everyone asks, well, why wouldn't you just bottle it straight out of the barrel? My feeling is that as good as this is, I can't necessarily tell that it's from here. The oak is so intense that in as much as it's rich and round and buttery and popcorn and bacony and all the good things, it needs, for me, it needs to speak of this place, and I find that the oak just overwhelms all of the terroir aspects. And so this is one of the reasons why we do some in steel, some in oak. It's super yummy, but it's too much, and I want it to be of here for sure. So here we have a tank sample from our 2019, same vintage. We took it out of the bottom of the tank, and so you'll see that it's not as clear as the one from the barrel. It has been sitting in that tank since the fall as well, after fermentation, but devoid of oxygen, devoid of air, whereas there's a little bit of oxidation to our barrel version of it. Here, this is pure fruit. This is, it tastes and smells like a gravel driveway after a rain. The mineral component is so present here, and it almost overwhelms the fruit. So this, for me personally, is my favorite version. This is super sexy, but it's lacking some of this. This does better with some of this, and so we blend the two together. So I'll taste this one in and of itself. Ooh. Both of these have gone through malolactic fermentation. They're a little bit rounder. This definitely comes across as much more tart, much more fresh compared to this one. This one has a lasting, waxy feel in your mouth, whereas this one is really much more all about the fruit and the freshness, the acidity, the perceived acidity. Even though these two have the same amount of acids, the stuff that's been taken out of the barrel has leached some of those richer components out of the wood, whereas this obviously has not had that. So now comparing this super fresh mineral version with this super rich buttery popcorn version, that's about, I'm going to say about 3/4 to 1/4, which is similar to the blend that we typically end up with. and giving it a good swirl. I still get some nice oak on the nose, but it's not as intense as it was, of course, as you'd imagine. And I'm still also getting some mineral on the nose as well, which we're getting like the best of both, I'd say, and still maintaining the identity of this area. Not as sharp or as mineral as the steel version was. Oh, that's so good. And not as, it still has a lot of those richer elements from the barrel, but it's not overwhelming. So basically here, that was one barrel. That is a new barrel this year. It has more intensity than a used barrel would. So we have a few barrels that we're blending into the steel. All the other barrels are older barrels, and so they're not going to be as intense as that one new barrel was. Cheers, guys, and boy, I look forward to having this in bottle. See you soon.